There's a lot in that book. So, but this has been the process of church history. And the idea is that as the church travels through history, it continues. Now, we don't change, in a sense, we don't change the Bible. But everyone who comes to the Bible and looks at it comes from their own place in history and from their own culture and from their own time. And so there's a lot here they're going to have to work through. And the Bible was written in a variety of cultures over a long period of time in a variety of languages. So there's stuff in there too. And that all of this is a living process. And now we're getting into Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, because part of Christian doctrine says the Holy Spirit is at work in this entire process. The Holy Spirit was at work in giving us the Bible we have. The Holy Spirit has been at work in the process of church history. The Holy Spirit is at work when we read the Bible. Now, you can hear that in two ways. One way is to say, well, the Holy Spirit is at work when I read the Bible. Therefore, everything I see is right. Well,
everything you see is part of history.
Everything you see is part of history. And very quickly, the church began to adopt a practice that said, we don't read the Bible, you know, it's just, this isn't a Bible. Just want to be sure, this is not a Bible. Creeds and confessions are not the Bible. We read the Bible together. And we interpret the Bible together. Why is that important?
So that we don't become God.
Yes.
You know, so we don't think we're God.
Exactly. And we believe that the Holy Spirit is at work. I often like to, thank you. Here we have a Bible. Americans are individualists. Individualism is fine as long as it's balanced. I always, when I read the New Testament, I often get the impression that, is the Holy Spirit within me? I think that's not a great way to say it. Is the Holy Spirit working within me? Yes. The Holy Spirit is just as much working between us. Because when you read the New Testament, what is the Holy Spirit doing? It's bringing people together. It's bringing different people together. And in this process, they're working stuff out. And so, this is the history of the church. Any questions on this? Now these are the creeds. And so over a long period of time, these creeds were formed. And these creeds, there are three creeds that the Christian Reformed Church signs on to. The Apostles' Creed, which is the most ancient creed, and we actually know very little about how that creed arose. It arose after the time of the New Testament, but before the time of the major church councils. The Nicene Creed, which goes into the Trinity and who Jesus is. It's very similar to the Apostles' Creed, but it's a little bit longer. And then the Athanasian Creed, which goes into who God is at a little bit more depth, and that's a longer creed. And so these creeds were working out a number of issues, that things like Jesus is fully God and fully man. That we worship one God who is in three persons. And that's really complicated and tricky. And so the creeds go into all of those things. And these creeds have been with the church. So let's imagine, often when people talk church history, they often draw it like a tree. And this is a little deceptive. It's handy because basically for the first 1,000 years, we imagine that the church was united until the first big break, which was really over language. You had the Latin church in the West, and then you had the Greek church in the East. And that was the first big division over the church. And it split over whether the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father alone or the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. Now when you get down to this level in the creeds, you're really pretty far down into the weeds. You're really looking at the knitting hard. And to try to answer that question from the biblical material, you're a ways in by that point. Part of, I think, a real part of the issue between the split between the Eastern Church and the Western Church was over language. The Roman Empire was in two parts, and the eastern part of the empire was wealthier, better educated, more developed. The western part of the empire was poorer, far more barbarian influence, a lot of stuff going on. And so one of the big fights was that the Eastern Empire had patriarchs that were leading the church. Patriarch from Antioch, Patriarch from Alexandria, Patriarch of Jerusalem. And these were bishops over these cities, and generally speaking, this side of the church made decisions by consensus. Well, the Bishop of Rome had a particular point he could make based on the Gospel of Matthew. Anybody know what that point was? Who was the first Bishop of Rome?
Peter.
Peter. And what does Jesus say of Peter?
On this rock.
On this rock I will build my church. And so the Bishop of Rome said to the bishops of these other churches, hey, I sit in Peter's seat. I am the rock. You all are on, you all are behind me. What do you think these bishops thought of that? No. We all work by consensus. And so they split. And that's a very big deal. Now the reason I say this is a little deceptive is because if you actually look all the way back to the New Testament, yeah, that's Paul.
Side note, by the way, there is a bathroom, right? That
Yep.
you open the door for.
Bathroom's over there and bathroom's over there.
Maybe take a little stretch break in 5 minutes or so.
Sure.
Yeah.
So the church was never this unified. And if you read church history, you find that all along the way, the church is fighting over all kinds of things. And decisions are being made over all kinds of things. But what, over the long run, and this is Alistair McGrath's point, this tends to endure. And so...
What do you mean by that? What tends to endure?
Well, the basic formulations that the councils gave us, Jesus, fully God and fully man, if you shortchange either part, your church runs into trouble. God as Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. If you start to get that Trinity out of balance, your church runs into trouble. And
Give us
so,
an example of that.
the science, let's look at the science, Bible versus science fight today. Is the God of creation also the God of redemption? The Belgic Confession, one of the things that you probably read when you read the Belgic Confession is that God reveals himself in two books.
Book of nature.
The book of nature, which is general revelation, and the Bible, which is special revelation. This balance, and balance probably isn't the right word, but you can't let go of either book. What happens if you let go? It's harder for us because we're so thoroughly secular to understand what happens if we let go of the book of Scripture, of special revelation. But it's probably easier for us to see, how do you get out of balance if you let go of the book of general revelation?
Then
Do you know anybody who has let go of general revelation? Yeah, you're laughing, right?
Figure in
Well, even let's say blood transfusions. Okay, so let's say you work in the medical profession and a Jehovah's Witness comes in and, I can't have a blood transfusion. Well, why? Well, now you're getting theological. And when you get into the Jehovah's Witnesses, you get into, well, who is Christ? And what is the Bible? And how did it come about? The conversation with a Jehovah's Witness about blood transfusions is a theological conversation and has everything to do with this process. Now, Jehovah's Witnesses come about out of this burned out region, the same area of New York, where the Latter-day Saints come out of, where the Oneida community comes out of. There's a ton of church history in there. And actually what happens with a lot of these groups is that, and you'll hear this today, a lot of people say, I think the church has lost its basic attachment to the Bible. There's all this church history, and they're talking about all of this stuff. I don't believe any of this stuff. It's me and Jesus alone, and so I'm going to sit down and I'm going to read this Bible, and I'm going to read it with fresh eyes. And then I'm finding things that these guys missed. And then I'm charismatic, and then I start my own church. Well, that's where the LDS came from. That's where the Jehovah's Witness came from.
Science.
That's where Christian Science came from. The difficulty they have is they're saying, in a sense, I am God. The Bible fell into my hands. I'm reading it with not naive, I wouldn't use that word. I'm reading it with clean eyes, and I alone can interpret what this means.
What do you do? Maybe this is a question to pick up after a stretch break or something, or maybe it's quick. I don't know. But what do you do with just the general gut sense that a lot of people have of, this whole history just feels like a bunch of people that think they're right, and I have to toe the line, and I have to just trust them. Sort of that kind of feeling that is, I think, pretty current. Like, to caricature it as just, they've just made all these decisions for me, and I just have to kind of blindly believe that it's all been done well. When I know I have this huge distrust of leadership, and that's like the history of, and especially religious leadership, and that's a history of religious leadership that has given me a bunch of things I'm supposed to sign on to and stand. So
And they're clearly racist and sexist.
And they're clearly racist
Yeah,
and sexist.
right.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I have a whole bunch of reasons not to listen to these people.
yeah.
This is every culture has its strengths and its weaknesses. Part of our strengths is that, we demand that authority, be responsible and prove itself to me. That's a strength. What's the weakness of it? It's the guy who goes into court and says, I don't need any of those stinking lawyers with their fancy law degrees. I'm going to represent myself. It's the same impulse that the person says, I don't need any of those stinking doctors who went to medical school and stuff. I think medical school is sexist and racist. I'm going to be my own doctor. That's the same impulse. And it's pretty hard to talk people out of it. But over the long run, just like with these heresies, it doesn't work out too good. Because the guy walks into court and the judge looks at him and the judge says, what about this law? I never heard about that law. Well, why? You didn't go to law school, did you? Well, what about this system in your body? Well, I don't know anything about that. Well, you didn't go to medical school, did you? But the thing is, if you're living in a society that's pretty well run and we're extremely buffered from all kinds of things, the one person that says, I'm just going to make up my mind on my own and I don't trust anyone. You don't think it was a bunch of white men engineers that built that airplane you're about to sit on? What about their sexism and racism? The Wright brothers, they were white. You trust an airplane? Well, I didn't think about that. You just walk on. So it's a very naive posture, but it's a very common posture. And how to talk someone out of it? Usually you can't. You can hardly talk anybody out of anything. They come to the point when they start fiddling with their own health and they discover, well, maybe I should listen to someone else. At that point, they're teachable. But let's take a break, and then we've talked about creeds, and we're going to talk about confessions, and then we can get into your confessional questions. So, sound good? Has this been helpful?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, it's great.
Okay, good. Well, let's take a break.